How to Create the Universe by Hockney. 7. The Mathematical Mind. Either mathematics is too big for the human mind, or the human mind is more than a machine. Kurt Gödel. The mind is mathematics. The mind is a living, striving, self-solving, self-optimizing mathematical organism. Boring. We get people saying that the God series is boring and repetitive. Sorry, but you're not our audience. Our books are for the future Bnizes of the world, the people who can appreciate the points we are making, just as we appreciate the myriad of vital nuanced points made by Leibniz himself. People who don't understand what we are saying imagine we are just saying the same thing over and over again. In fact, we are presenting richer and richer detail for all of those who need to go deeper and deeper into the world of ontological mathematics, and really understand that it's the definitive answer to everything, and the future direction of science. If people think our books are bad, they should try studying M-theory. Any proposed final theory of everything is going to be way beyond the reach of ordinary people. That's just a simple fact. Stupid people won't get it. The really bright will. That's the way it goes. Leibniz was the most intelligent person who ever lived, but 99.9% of humanity would be bored of his work within seconds, and start checking out Facebook, or the TV, or their iPod, or phoning up their friends, or whatever. That's the nature of the human race. Don't blame us. Things are boring to you only to the extent that you are incapable of getting into it. Seeing the light. All the 50 years of conscious brooding have brought me no closer to answer the question, what are light quanta? Of course today every rascal thinks he knows the answer, but he is deluding himself. Einstein. The issue of what are light quanta is as fundamental as it gets. As Einstein admitted, he didn't know the answer. This is shocking given that Einstein was essentially the person who gave science its modern understanding of light. But that's scarcely any understanding at all. Light poses immense difficulties for science in several ways. For one thing, light is massless and dimensionless, so how can it be said to belong to the material world of space-time at all? Does this mean there is some other domain that science, given its religious faith in materialism and empiricism, refuses to countenance the idea of any other domain, especially any that looks disturbingly like a domain of Cartesian mind? Or God? Given Maxwell's theory of electromagnetism, light seems to bear an uncanny resemblance to sine and cosine waves, but that turns science into mathematics, so science is having none of that. Light seems to be inextricably linked to singularities, but science can't stand those and wants to abolish them. Light seems to partake of so-called wave-particle duality, but how can massless, dimensionless things be particles in any way? Light seems to make no sense at all. To have any hope of understanding light, you must place it within a formal ontology and epistemology, but science is incapable of addressing ontology and epistemology. That's the domain of philosophy, metaphysics and logic, and science is having nothing to do with that. Light is quite simply a nightmare for science. Einstein said, if you can't explain it to a 6-year-old, you don't understand it yourself. Well, Einstein certainly couldn't explain photons to a 6-year-old. If science is all about atoms, atomic number greater than 0, hence about extension and Cartesian matter, ontological mathematics is all about photons, atomic number equals 0, hence about non-extension and Cartesian mind. Unlike scientific atoms, mathematical photons can be treated in a strictly analytic manner. The central thesis of ontological mathematics is that a photon, like an atom, can be split. If experimentalists ever work out how to split a photon, the Illuminati will have to be awarded the Nobel Prize, which should certainly make for an interesting ceremony in Stockholm. A photon, in ontological mathematics, comprises a cosine wave and an orthogonal, matching sine wave. We can associate the cosine wave with a Coran, space particle, and the sine wave with a chronon, a time particle. Such a pairing is strictly dimensionless. It has no space-time signature. The reason for this is simple. A Coran is maximally length contracted, that is, it has 0 length. This is equivalent to saying that distance passes infinitely slowly, Or, more accurately, that the Quran simply isn't in space at all, it's in the frequency domain. A chronon, on the other hand, is maximally time dilated, that is, time passes infinitely slowly. Or, more accurately, that the chronon simply isn't in time at all, it's in the frequency domain. So, neither component of the photon is in space-time. The Quran is in the frequency domain, not in space, and has no relationship to time. The chronon is in the frequency domain too, not in time, and has no relationship to space. The interaction of the Quran and chronon is thus entirely outside space-time, leaving them with a null space-time signature. Together, they form an electromagnetic standing wave. class.ux.edu/staff/martin/m_standing-wave.html. In order to support this mathematical conception of a photon, which is radically different from the scientific view of a photon, deriving from Einstein, we are going to highlight the fallacies in Brian Greene's account of light, which peddles the science establishment's illogical propaganda. Brian Greene wrote, "In The Fabric of the Cosmos, special relativity declares a law for all motion. The combined speed of any object's motion through space and its motion through time is always precisely equal to the speed of light." We agree with that. Greene goes on, "At first you may instinctively recoil from this statement, since we are all used to the idea that nothing but light can travel at light speed. But that familiar idea refers solely to motion through space. We are now talking about something related, yet richer, an object's combined motion through space and time. The key fact, Einstein discovered, is that these two kinds of motion are always complementary. When the parked car you were looking at speeds away, what really happens is that some of its light speed motion is diverted from motion through time into motion through space, keeping their combined total unchanged. Such diversion unassailably means that the car's motion through time slows." Agreed. Moreover, the maximum speed through space is reached when all light speed motion through time is fully diverted into light speed motion through space. One way of understanding why it is impossible to go through space at greater than light speed. Agreed. Then things start to fall apart. Greene says, light, which always travels at light speed through space, is special in that it always achieves such total diversion. As soon as you see a word such as special, you should instantly be on full alert. We require a sufficient reason for any such specialness. What is the sufficient reason for light to travel at light speed through space, but not through time? Or is there something else other than light that travels at light speed through time? Greene already implied as much when he said, "When the parked car you were looking at speeds away, what really happens is that some of its light speed motion is diverted from motion through time into motion through space." How can a stationary car be traveling at light speed through time unless there's a mechanism for it to do so, and a carrier to enable it to happen? Greene has told us that this carrier can't be light, which, allegedly, only travels through space. So what is it? So, now we have some unknown thing that travels at light speed without being light. Who knew? Have you heard any scientist publicly stating that there's something other than light that inherently travels at light speed? This is the whole problem with science. As soon as you subject it to serious scrutiny, it collapses. According to science, nothing can travel at light speed except light. But now we have a senior scientist telling us that something entirely stationary in space travels at light speed through time. But that would mean it's massless. How can that make any sense? How can a car be massless? Don't ask a scientist. Wikipedia says, in particle physics, a massless particle is a particle whose invariant mass is theoretically zero. As of 2015, the two known massless particles were gauge bosons, the photon, carrier of electromagnetism, and the gluon, carrier of the strong force. However, gluons are never observed as free particles, since they are confined within hadrons. The mystery deepens, Greene writes, and just as driving due east leaves no motion for traveling north, moving at light speed through space leaves no motion for traveling through time. Well, by exactly the same logic, traveling at light speed through time must equally leave no motion for traveling through space. Greene says, time stops when traveling at the speed of light through space. But that must equally mean that space stops when traveling at the speed of light through time. Green says, a watch worn by a particle of light would not tick at all. Equally, a ruler carried by a time particle would not measure anything other than 0 in respect of light. Why should travel through space be privileged over the travel through time? If there's no sufficient reason for it, it cannot be true. There's something fundamentally wrong with science's understanding of light, and it's easy to see what it is, for anyone not blinded by empiricism and materialism. That is, light is not a single entity that travels only through space and not through time. It is in fact a dual entity. It is not, however, traveling through space and time. It's not traveling through space and time at all. Light belongs to the frequency domain, not the space-time domain, and that's exactly why it's massless, maximally length contracted and maximally time dilated, and why it has a unique, fixed, absolute status in relation to its speed, unlike all of the things with mass within space-time. Einstein, in his special theory of relativity, used 3 expressions of the Lorentz transformation, one for length contraction, one for time dilation, and one for mass increase, in the following equations. The m subscript refers to an object moving at speed v through space, and the r subscript to the object at rest. 1. Length contraction. Lm equals LRV1V2/C2. 2. Time dilation. Trademark equals TR/V1V2/C2. 3. Mass increase equals Mr/V1V2/C2. In ontological mathematics, a 4th equation is added. 4. Imaginary mass decrease. MIM equals MIRV1V2/C2. Moreover, time dilation becomes imaginary space dilation, and we split the 4 equations into 2 distinct, complementary pairs. Space. 1. Length contraction. Lm equals LRV1V2/C2. 2. Mass increase equals Mr/V1V2/C2. Time. Imaginary space. 1. Time dilation. Trademark equals TR/V1V2/C2. 2. Imaginary mass decrease. MIM equals MIRV1V2/C2. As speed through space increases, length contracts and mass increases, while, correspondingly, time dilates and imaginary mass decreases. If we were referring to the speed through time rather than the speed through space, the opposite considerations would apply. When Brian Greene wrote, "When the parked car you were looking at speeds away, what really happens is that some of its light speed motion is diverted from motion through time into motion through space," he was acknowledging that there must be a speed through time. What else does motion through time mean? Yet have you ever seen speed through time referenced in any scientific equation? Einstein's equations don't relate to one situation, that is time, space and mass relative to absolute light speed. Rather, they concern 2 different situations, one in time and one in space. Regarding space, length contraction takes place and mass increases with increasing speed through space. Regarding time, time dilation takes place and imaginary mass decreases with decreasing speed through time. It's not a question of light as a single entity being maximally time dilated and length contracted. Rather, at maximum speed through space, the real aspect of light is maximally time dilated and length contracted. At maximum speed through time, on the other hand, the exact opposite is true. Time, imaginary space, is maximally contracted and length maximally dilated, meaning that it passes infinitely slowly. Einstein simply didn't consider speed through time, hence his fallacious theory of relativity. Science would have an entirely different conception of reality if speed through time were considered in conjunction with speed through space. By Pythagoras' theorem, the square of the speed through space plus the square of the speed through time equals the square of light speed, and we assign light the speed of 1, in natural units rather than man-made units. When an object's speed through space is 0, the object is stationary in space. Its speed through time is c. When the object's speed through time is 0, its speed through space is c. When an object's natural length in space is 0, its natural length in time is 1. Similarly, when an object's natural length in time is 0, its natural length in space is 1. As with speed, the square of time length plus the square of space length equals the square of light length, radius of a unit circle. In relation to mass, a smaller and smaller length for an object corresponds, in wave terms, to a smaller and smaller wavelength and thus a higher and higher frequency, hence higher and higher energy, which Einstein equates to higher and higher mass. As wavelength approaches 0, energy, mass, approaches infinity. Exactly the same considerations apply to time, imaginary space, and imaginary mass, hence imaginary energy, time energy. As real energy approaches 0, imaginary energy approaches infinity. As imaginary energy approaches 0, real energy approaches infinity. The difficulties. God does not care about our mathematical difficulties. He integrates empirically. Einstein, all of us do mathematics in our heads all the time, without realizing it. We do it unconsciously, not consciously. If we could do it consciously, we would be gods. Great spirits have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds. Einstein, indeed. If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it. Einstein's great problem was that he wasn't willing to contemplate sufficiently absurd ideas, most especially that this is a mathematical universe, and not scientific at all. Sometimes one pays most for things one gets for nothing. Einstein. And sometimes one gets nothing for things one pays most for. Why is it that nobody understands me and everybody likes me? Einstein. It's better than nobody understanding you and everybody hating you. The Lorentz transformation. In physics, the Lorentz transformation, or transformations, is named after the Dutch physicist Hendrik Lorentz. It was the result of attempts by Lorentz and others to explain how the speed of light was observed to be independent of the reference frame, and to understand the symmetries of the laws of electromagnetism. The Lorentz transformation is in accordance with special relativity, but was derived before special relativity. Wikipedia. What is never discussed in standard scientific textbooks is the fact that the Lorentz transformation can just as easily be understood in absolute terms rather than relativistic terms, in which case it refutes rather than supports Einstein's special theory of relativity. The relativistic interpretation of the Lorentz transformation abolishes the ether. The absolute interpretation preserves the ether. Einstein did not refute the alternative interpretation. No one has. It has simply become unfashionable, and no one gives any thought to it. This highlights one of the central failings of science. It rejects certain theories even though it has not falsified those theories. They have been rejected not on scientific grounds but on philosophical grounds. Yet science is always keen to claim it's not a philosophy but a method. It is of course a method supporting and enacting a philosophy. There's a simple explanation for why the speed of light is observed to be independent of any space-time reference frame, namely, it's not in space-time at all, as you would expect. No scientist ever considered this simplest of all explanations, the one most consistent with Occam's razor. That's because scientists never apply any rational or logical principles whatsoever. They apply their ideology of materialism and empiricism, so any explanation outside that ideology is automatically rejected. The ether isn't something that light travels through. Light is the ether. Light resides in a frequency singularity that controls all of space-time and all space-time reference frames. All space-time reference frames must adjust to accommodate the frequency domain of light, and they do so via absolute, not relativistic, Lorentz transformations. This means that if you are traveling close to the speed of light, you are being physically length contracted and time dilated, and you will die. According to Einstein, any suitable observer can simply deny that he is moving and claim that it's the rest of the universe that is being length contracted and time dilated. Given two observers in motion with respect to each other, each can simultaneously claim that the other is length contracted and time dilated. This, of course, destroys objective reality. We can no longer state what actually is the case. There is no reality principle upon which everyone can agree, and we now have to rely on subjective viewpoints. The ether is necessary to provide a reality principle. The ether is a frequency singularity, which is exactly why it cannot be physically detected and has no physical consequences. The ether is mental, not material, and reflects the cosmic mathematical mind that controls the universe. This idea is anathema to scientists, who deny the existence of mind independent of matter, so it is rejected without a second thought. They would prefer to destroy reality rather than give up on materialism. That's how irrational they are. Einstein believed that his relativity theory was still consistent with a deterministic universe, that is, one where God did not play dice, even though, by banishing the ether, he had rendered reality subjective rather than objective. He wasn't worried by this. He considered that because the respective subjective viewpoints were still linked by precise mathematics, the Lorentz transformation, he was still operating within a deterministic world. He was horrified by quantum mechanics because it was associated with indeterminism. Yet how can Einstein's relativistic ideas not be indeterministic too? If you can't specify a reality principle, if you are forced to consider every subjective viewpoint, how can you say what determines what? If two observers don't know which of them is moving, and which isn't, and both can regard themselves as stationary while the other seems to be undergoing a metamorphosis in accordance with the Lorentz transformation, how can we refer to causation and determinism at all? Nothing is causing or determining anything else. All that Einstein did with his relativity theory was destroy objectivity, and replace it with subjectivity where different subjective viewpoints could be related to each other mathematically, but certainly not physically. Either you're moving or you're not. Either you're being length contracted and time dilated or you're not, but not according to Einstein. Now, it's essential to point out that Einstein's crazy scheme would be potentially correct if it were not for the frequency singularity of light that stands outside space-time, and to which all space-time reference frames have an absolute relationship, as they were said to have with the ether before Einstein arrived on the scene. What is astounding about the science community is the way it so uncritically moved to support of Einstein, and seemingly had no concerns about how Einstein had just laid waste objective reality and the reality principle. Equally, it had no concerns when quantum mechanics, as conventionally interpreted, destroyed causation and determinism, and reduced reality to a casino. If you combine Einstein's subjective madhouse and quantum mechanics' cosmic version of Monte Carlo, you get the worst explanation of reality ever supplied by anyone. You kill off God, and replace him with insanity. The antidote is ontological mathematical rationalism. Wave-particle duality. The true answer to so-called wave-particle duality is that all particles are flowing points, and each flowing point is following a wave trajectory, internally programmed into it, as its Aristotelian form, or formula, so to speak. A flowing point, hence a particle, is a tiny information package expressing energy. During a collision, it acts like a localized thing, that is a particle. When it's traveling, it moves like a wave. Trillions of flowing points acting in concert, as in the case of a bullet, for example, have a wave profile that averages out to a straight line. This is why quantum wave phenomena are typically seen only in the case of isolated particles, that is in microscopic rather than macroscopic instances. This is where large-scale averaging effects have not had the opportunity to conceal wave effects. The waves are still there in the macroscopic cases, of course, but they are buried in the mathematical detail.